Okay, we're going to get started now. Apologies for starting a couple of minutes late. It turns out faculty room sounds a lot like faculty house. And even if you've been on the faculty for a while, you may not know where you're going. So I apologize for keeping everyone waiting. But I appreciate on a really cold day when there aren't a lot of people around campus, because many of the students are not back yet, that we have such a great turnout. And I think it shows how much interest there is in understanding what's happening right now in the energy sector and in Russia, and how those two things come together. My name is Jason Bordoff. I'm a faculty member at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. I direct the Center on Global Energy Policy there. Delighted Tim Frye, one of my colleagues from the Harriman Institute, is here as well. And we're going to have a conversation in just a couple of minutes after some introductory remarks with Vladimir Milov, who many of you know, but is a politician, publicist, economist, energy expert, the former Deputy Minister of Energy, advisor to the Minister of Energy, head of the Department of the Federal Energy Commission, has worked on numerous energy reform concepts in Russia, founded and leads the Institute of Energy Policy, a Russian energy policy think tank since 2003, has been a columnist in several major Russian political and business publications, and has strong views on the government in Russia and what the situation is when it comes to the political situation there generally, and obviously to the role that energy plays. So we're really delighted that he could join us today to share some of those thoughts, and then we can have a conversation to discuss a bit further. So please, Vladimir.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you, everybody. It's a privilege to be here. We discussed this event previously. Of course, the big interest is how Russia would react to sharply declining international oil prices. But I want to begin with the notion that it's not just a question of declining oil price, which is the important challenge for Russian oil and gas industry. I think we have actually many challenges and problem issues coming together at one point, including the oil price. But we have a couple of systemic processes which have been evolving in the past couple of decades, which are now beginning to bite. And they themselves have, I think, probably to some extent, bigger influence than the price issue itself, the issue of export revenues. First important challenge is the expiration of what I call the brownfield era in Russian oil and gas production. It's no secret that in the past couple of decades delivered most of the bulk of Russian oil and gas output, and most of the new output which have helped increased Russian revenues, increased the total production numbers, from basically the existing old fields which were introduced in Soviet or early post-Soviet times, or fields which have been recently developed, but they are basically adjacent to the main production regions. They are not far. These are the regions with the developed infrastructure and with relatively low lifting costs. But the problem is that these regions with lower costs and with developed infrastructure, they are expiring their potential, and a lot of fields are already, depleted fields are already in decline, both in oil and gas industries. And you really have to go further to absolutely new greenfield, underexplored, underdeveloped regions, some of them remote, some of them extremely expensive, like the Arctic, like the Far East offshore or Eastern Siberia. Beyond doubt, this will lead, and this already leads to very significant increases both in operational costs and capital expenditures, which is somewhat a totally different story than what we had before. Like, you know, if you take a look at, for instance, at the last officially published financial report by Rosneft, you could see that the lifting costs in today's dollars are like $3 per barrel on the wellhead. The operational cost to produce a barrel of oil, just $3. If somebody's going to mention you bigger numbers, don't trust him, because you have to really look at what the companies state at their accounts. This basically reflects the fact that the production from the old brown fields is much cheaper, but their potential is largely expired. and you need to invest more, and you need to go to remote regions which are far more expensive to be able to at least keep the current production levels, not even speaking about increasing output, which is indeed a challenge. And the second important challenge is the structural challenge. I'm sure a lot of you have been following the events in Russian oil and gas industries in the past 10, 15 years. And the clear trend was towards centralization of control under the hand of the government. The government had put emphasis to supporting the establishment of the so-called national champions, big state-controlled companies which dominate the industries in oil and gas. And that was obviously contrary with ideas of guys like me, who working in the government in the late 90s, early 2000s had promoted a totally different approach, pretty decentralized, with government basically exiting control over mineral extracting industries and only collecting taxes, but giving away all the investment and operations to private initiative. This approach obviously had failed, and the current government and President Putin have made a totally different policy choice towards state monopolies and towards centralization. I have for a long time predicted that this would result in very severe difficulties and a lot of inefficiency, which is indeed a burden for the oil and gas industry. It could have passed through this brownfield challenge towards development of new greenfield oil and gas producing areas much easier if it was not burdened by these severe inefficiencies caused by the operational style of monopolies like Gazprom and Rosneft. I'm talking first about very high debts, which has been acquired not because of the massive capital investment in developing their core business, producing fields and so on, but most of this debt was acquired through extremely controversial acquisitions of assets. So this process of centralization of control was a quite costly one. It did costs, like, you know, in a period when Gazprom, for instance, has been the most active acquirer of outside assets, including oil companies, Sibneft, power generation companies, independent gas producers, it had spent roughly $60 billion on just from 2004 to 2009 on major acquisitions of private assets, which have far exceeded, for instance, capital expenditures related to upstream gas production itself. So they basically spent far more on centralizing control over different private assets than on doing what they should, on investing in development gas fields. Inefficiencies are also related with operating costs increasing much more rapidly than it is desired, and with investments which are absolutely out of public control, which are non-transparent, and which are allegedly associated with, some people, including myself, go as far as directly saying that there are many kickbacks involved and corruption practices. But even aside from that, it is very clear that comparative costs of developing the upstream fields, building new pipelines, is substantially higher, like per BCM of gas producing capacity or per kilometer of new gas pipelines than we can see at other examples internationally which take place all over the world. So all this, yet one more thing about the inefficiency of state companies is the marketing policy. Particularly this concerns Gazprom. And on one hand, Gazprom's marketing approach, both domestically and in Europe, has been quite outdated. It's been totally based on absolutely outdated prehistoric mechanisms like long-term take-or-pay contracts adjusted to the price of oil, which turned to be absolutely non-competitive in the new environment when the European market has started to open up and more competition pressure has been exerted on Gazprom. And another problem is the fact that this marketing policy have been highly politicized and influenced by interests of Vladimir Putin's foreign policy. Now, example, this year, Gazprom's exports to Europe in October and November had been falling by like 25–26% year on year. They have published only preliminary figures on the results of exports to Europe this year. It seems like there is a decline from 162 billion cubic meters in 2013 to like 145 last year. Gazprom had significantly lost, like 15–16 BCM of exports to Europe have been lost. And, you know, you cannot really tell what is the primary cause of it. I'd say it's actually different factors, first being the overall inefficiency of Gazprom's marketing policy and the ability of European consumers to buy gas elsewhere at cheaper cost. And the other factor was specifically waged supply war against certain European countries which have been involved in the reverse supplies of gas to Ukraine. Countries like Slovakia, Poland, and others which had agreed to supply gas through reverse schemes to Ukraine this fall. And basically, Gazprom has been threatening to reduce supplies to these countries to a minimum possible contract level, not to give them the opportunity to sell excess volumes of gas to Ukraine. So it was an absolutely artificial cutting of your wings just for political and not for commercial purposes. Basically, what we experienced last year was a catastrophic decline of Gazprom's exports, not only to Europe, but to CIS only, because only on stopping a very controversial decision, a non-commercial decision on stopping gas supplies to Ukraine last June, Gazprom have lost about 12 or 13 BCM of supplies to the CIS alone. So you see on the European front, on the former Soviet front, and also on domestic front, Gazprom experiences severe problems with selling its volumes of gas. Domestically, this is a story which largely comes unnoticed, but it's important to watch as well. It's not in the headlines, but Gazprom, 9 months of 2014, the last available information, Gazprom's domestic sales of gas were down 12% year on year. And it has been a steady decline for, from 2000 to 2010. Gazprom has been supplying roughly more or less around 300 BCM to domestic markets steadily. But then these numbers have started to rapidly decrease. And in 2011, for instance, the overall amount of gas supplied domestically was 265 billion cubic meters a year. And right now, this year, given the trend that we had during 9 months, will be probably around somewhere 200 BCM, which means they lost a quarter of volumes of supply to domestic gas market just within 3–4 years. And obviously, this is, I think, the reaction of consumers to Gazprom's relentless program of increasing regulated domestic gas prices, which is supported by Putin, supported by the government, and was thoroughly executed through all these years, despite all the crisis environment and all the economic difficulties and high inflation which country had experienced. Our idea was that we unbundle Gazprom. This is something we proposed 15 years ago when I used to work in the government. Our idea was to unbundle Gazprom and create a self-balancing, highly competitive and pretty open domestic gas market, which would find a more or less equilibrium price. However, the government have chosen a different approach to keep Gazprom centralized and to approve a program of a quite aggressive increase of domestic gas prices. At that time being, like 10 years ago, it was pretty easy to argue for that because domestic gas prices in Russia have been fairly low, but they're not anymore. According to Gazprom's last IFRS financial report for 6 months of 2014, the average price of supplying gas to domestic market, including VAT, was $3.5 per million BTU in dollars of the day. I mean, I'm talking about the first half of last year, which is not a low price anymore. And we see that already certain limitations are starting to show up, and consumers, basically domestic consumers, obviously buy less gas from Gazprom. Ridiculously. That's an utterly ridiculous story. Those of you who are unaware, I strongly advise that you go to Kremlin website and read this. I'm specifically talking about the meeting of the so-called Presidential Commission on Energy Affairs, which is chaired by Vladimir Putin himself, which took place on June 4th last year. And specifically, it was devoted to discussing domestic energy market. The transcript in full is available on the Kremlin's website. You should read it, because Putin have actually lashed out against energy producers, saying, look, guys, what I hear from Russian businesses, manufacturing industries, large energy consumers, is that it is much more advantageous and profitable for them to open new manufacturing enterprises in the United States of America. I'm not kidding. It's available on the Kremlin's website. Putin was referring to United States of America as an example of more competitive, lower and predictable energy prices as compared to the environment he created with his own hands in Russia. So basically he was saying that with the current price environment we have at the domestic market, we're losing the competition to United States. Because in the United States, obviously, environment is much more competitive, and the price situation is in a lot of cases different. So these are the factors, these inefficiencies created by monopoly environment, I'd say multiplied by the greenfield challenge which I was talking about in the beginning. These are probably the main factors which present the biggest challenge for oil and gas industry, you know, even disregard of falling of the oil price. And with the oil price, it is very important to understand that the taxation system in the oil and gas industry in Russia is designed that way. So to simplify it, basically everything which is above $40 per barrel, most of the revenue above this level goes to the state, the federal budget. And so the companies themselves are not really very much sensitive to, you know, falling of the price from $100 to 70, 80, maybe a bit more sensitive to fall of the oil price towards 50. But in this current environment, generally it is the state and the federal revenues which are suffering the most, not just companies yet. But of course, the current dynamics of the international oil price, it does not add up to a, you know, healthy progress and development of the oil and gas industry. However, again, I'd say it's not the main problem. I say the main problems are structural, and I just explained them to you. Now, another important problem is this debt burden, very heavy debt burden, which was accumulated. Particularly it is, so it led to a situation when Gazprom and Rosneft had debt to annual revenue ratio at a level of like 35–55%. So Rosneft is in the tightest spot at the moment, with their debt being over 50% of the annual revenue, and probably even more now because of the falling oil price. Actually, that problem pretty much constrains the very needed investments to develop new production areas. And also, as we have seen recently during the December currency crisis in Russia, it is not just a problem for oil and gas industry or oil and gas companies. That is the problem for the whole economics of the Russian Federation, because the so-called Black Tuesday of December 16th was exactly affiliated with the government's attempt basically to return to the practice of monetary emission, which we had like in the early 90s, 20 years ago in mass scale. Everybody understood that. The government had decided, the central bank had decided, together with the government, to help Rosneft repay some of its foreign debts which were due in December by issuing bonds in form of hidden central bank credit to Rosneft worth over 600 billion rubles. And, you know, everybody in Russia, all the market players, they pretty much are aware what is monetary emission. They remember what happened 20 years ago when Gerashchenko was the head of central bank and central bank provided massive credit to the real sector. It was explained that, you know, we need to promote growth, we need to give money to enterprises to allow them to invest this money in projects and so on. What happened after this massive monetary emission of the early 90s is that enterprises were pretty smart. They took the money given to them for the purpose of investing and developing their industries, and they invested them in the currency market, buying dollars. So everybody remembers that practice. This is why, relatively, you know, country-wise, this issue of Rosneft bonds in December, that was not so significant. And Rosneft didn't really go physically and buy dollars with this 600+ billion rubles. But the effect was that everybody completely lost trust in the policy of authorities because everybody knows what a monetary emission is. In fact, it is a Pandora's box. Once you open it, there's already a line of different state-controlled monopolies who also bid for state assistance. So everybody understood that basically there is a green light given, at least to one major case of monetary emission. So there as well might be a continuation. And also what we see now is we see energy companies, including Rosneft, Novatek, and others, basically lining up for direct government subsidies from the National Welfare Fund. When the National Welfare Fund was created years ago, the idea was that basically it will be the instrument of accumulating the oil wealth, the money from oil and gas industries, actually to help citizens of the country, pensioners and for other purposes. So oil and gas money to help ordinary Russians. Now, after all these years, it turns out that it will be the money taken out of the pockets of ordinary Russians to help oil and gas industries. This is how National Welfare Fund is supposed to work today, and which is also a result of quite an inefficient structure of the oil and gas industry that we have built over years. Already, the total amount of formal bids for National Welfare Fund money submitted to the government is roughly around 4.5 trillion rubles. The actual amount available in the fund is 3.1, far less than that. And not to mention that we will have one more important bidder which did not yet show up, which is Gazprom, because Gazprom has been denied pre-financing of construction of this Power of Siberia pipeline to China by the Chinese. There were, most of you are, I think, aware that Chinese $25 billion advance payment has been negotiated during the signing of this recent gas supply agreement, but then Chinese turned down the advance payment. There will be no advance payment. This issue was officially announced as cancelled during the November summit between presidents of Russia and China. So they will have to get the money somewhere. And there's yet even another problem, which, you know, I won't elaborate much in my introductory remarks, but I'll be happy to take on in the Q&A session, the sanctions, which have completely closed down Western financial markets for Russian borrowers, and we still have not found any meaningful alternative except for the monetary emission, which finally turned out to be such alternative. So Gazprom did not yet show up with a huge bid to finance the Power of Siberia pipeline from National Welfare Fund, but please take my outright prediction, it will. In the coming 2, 3, 4 months, I don't know. But there will be a huge, like $1 trillion bid from Gazprom to National Welfare Fund, which is already having excessive amount of claims that far exceed the amount of money available. So you see, what is happening is that this current over-centralized, excessively government-controlled oil and gas industry, it is not ready to meet the greenfield challenge, which I started to talk about in the beginning of my speech. We need massive new investments, but we don't have the money. We don't have the money because operation costs are too high, capital costs are too high, too much money is wasted, spent on kickbacks, spent on affiliated murky construction and operational contractors. Too much money was wasted for acquisitions instead of investments. And now, because of various issues from falling oil price to Western sanctions, financial sanctions against Russia, you can't have enough profits to finance all these investment projects, and you can't borrow. The opportunities for borrowing have become increasingly limited because of the sanctions introduced by the United States and the European Union. So it ended up with a situation when we, the taxpayers, will have to take money out of our pockets and give it away to Gazprom and Rosneft for them to be able to develop new projects in Eastern Siberia, offshore, and so on. I think, from my perspective, that is completely unacceptable. And unfortunately, this is the only possible result of energy policies pursued by Vladimir Putin during the past 15 years associated with the centralization. So what we see so far as a result, to sum up, is heavy decline of production in gas. Gazprom have hit the minimum in 2014. The first results have been just revealed. 423 BCM, which is, obscenely low amount of gas production. It is 21% less than the level of 1999. If you take a look at the past years, Gazprom was absolutely not able to climb above 500 BCM, and in 1999 it produced almost 550. But recently it's been hanging around on some figures like just less than 500 BCM a year, and last year it had fell to 423. And the fall in output has been not because of problems with upstream fields and insufficient production capacities, but ineffective marketing policy in the first place. Losing market in Europe, losing market in CIS, and losing domestic market big time. They have made an absolutely, tragic miscalculation that domestic consumers, energy-consuming industries will simply obey to this program of increased gas prices, which they had jointly agreed with the government, and will not do anything, will not react, and will not drop gas consumption, but the economic laws, they continue to work. So consumers had dropped, significantly dropped purchases of gas of Gazprom. So they are losing market on all fronts. And if you take a look at the other big players, particularly in the oil industry, you also see that results are quite weak. There is still no credible figures for only just preliminary figures on the results of performance of the oil industry in 2014. But you can see that Rosneft had led the decline. Like from 1 to 2% output decline was experienced last year. And generally, the big players have all showed weak results, either zero growth or decline. The biggest, ironically, the biggest progress in increasing oil production last year was achieved by one of the last remaining private companies, Bashneft, almost 8%. Almost 8% output growth last year compared to decline in the big behemoth state-controlled Rosneft. But ironically, Bashneft was taken over by the government at the end of the year, which I'm sure many of you are aware. So I would say that I don't think that we can have a huge discussion about it. I don't believe that the oil prices will stay at very low levels. There is some kind of a panic at the market right now and a big sell-off. I think they will come back, but not to 100 per barrel. My guess, and those of you who are interested might read my article which I've published on the 29th of December in Forbes Russia, specifically about that. I think that they will finally come back. International oil prices will come back to a corridor of between $60 to $80 per barrel within a reasonable time, because there are too many producers for whom like $50, $40 is unacceptable, and they will have to make decisions to take some volumes out of the market sooner or later. So I don't believe that the price will bottom up at like 30s, 40s and stay there. No, it will return. The biggest challenge which is associated with that, again, I repeat that, it's not the challenge for the oil and gas industry, but for the Russian budget and the state financial system, because this excessive super profits, again, mostly went to the federal government through taxation. Progressive scale of taxation linked to the international oil price. But of course, in the current tight spot in which our oil and gas industry finds itself, that situation with falling prices is definitely not helpful. You see that they have so many challenges that actually they are basically presenting problem by themselves even without this recent oil price dynamics, and I think the crisis in the oil and gas industry would have broken out sooner or later, even if prices had stayed at $100 per barrel. Well, the good thing about this current situation with the oil price, well, and maybe to some extent with the Western technological sanctions, I think is that this over excessively expensive Arctic projects will be scrapped, probably, because they don't have any opportunity to develop them now, and they don't have access to necessary technology, which is for good, because we have much more economically attractive options to develop new regions of production and deliver new volumes, be it North Caspian, be it Timana-Pechora, be it actually Western Siberia, where we do have some potential of enhancing the production. And I just recall, I've mentioned this Bashneft story. It is important to understand, and Bashneft had been industry's leader, although it's a relatively small company by Russian standards, but it has been an industry leader as far as the annual output growth is concerned for the past few years. Because after the fall of Rakhimov government in Bashkiria, it was acquired by private investors, new management, private management was introduced. So they actually started to significantly improve field management. And this is a very old Volga region, very depleted, but still they were able to achieve these volumes of production just through better management and improving efficiency. So even with the brown fields, there is still a lot of potential to pump more, but you have seen recently a lot of headlines which were basically instigated by Russian government and government-linked media sources saying that Russia made a historic record in volumes of oil output. It's like, when a snail moves forward, each single millimeter is another record as far as the distance traveled altogether, right? So, this is what is important to understand about the results of the oil industry in 2014 is that we have hit the lowest annual growth result since 1999. except for the crisis year of 2008 when we had a slight fraction of a % decline. But apart from that, it's the worst, despite in nominal absolute terms is another snail record, but in comparative terms, in terms of annual output growth, it is the worst industry's result since 1999, and it was mostly achieved by smaller private companies, whereas the big so-called national champions have shown already sizable decline, which is only to accelerate given this current situation. And just to let you understand, Rosneft has planned a very ambitious capital expenditure program, a record capital expenditure program for next year worth 1 trillion rubles. There is no sources of financing for that. It has no access to Western capital markets. Chinese have completely turned us down with providing credit to Russian companies and banks, and this will remain so. There will be no Chinese financing. And we can talk about this more if you're interested. National Welfare Fund is obviously limited, and obviously Rosneft will have to significantly cut its investment program. You can only judge how that will reflect on further production volumes down the road. So will Gazprom, because Gazprom already have made at the very end of December, they had another board meeting when they had revised capital expenditure program for 2015, which was approved just a couple of months before that. And they have cut it by 10%, but I think more cuts are to follow because of decline in revenues, because of price decline, because of catastrophic volume decline. And they will have to spend significant portion of their capital expenditure program on the beginning of construction of Power of Siberia, which will not be helpful in terms of securing future output levels and developing new gas production areas and so on. So, you know, even if the price climbs back, I think all this crisis environment, which have been, concentrating there for years, and which is obviously associated with ineffective, non-competitive, non-transparent, monopolized structure of the oil and gas industries, I think that's far more important factor than price. And it attacks them on all fronts, on costs front, on marketing front, on inefficient money allocation front, and so on. So I don't see very much bright future for oil and gas industries in this current environment. I think this year was the last one when the Russian government and Russian state media officially had the opportunity to put forward headlines like "we hit another record." I think this was the last snail record that we have recorded. And I think this year, which has just began, will be the first when we will experience significant decline in oil output in Russia. You never know how the situation is pretty much still manageable. The problem is that the guys who are in power in my country, they make just one systemic mistake after another, and it seems like they can't help it. It's still manageable. It's not catastrophic. But if the mismanagement continues, we have an example before our eyes, which was the latest years of Soviet Union, where in late 1970s, most of the industry people in Russia and the Communist Party leaders were extremely happy because Soviet Union had outpaced the United States by volume of oil output because of excessive pumping of oil from newly opened Western Siberian oil fields. However, starting from 1988, the significant output decline had begun, and it was obviously quite similarly associated with structural problems within the Soviet oil industry, within the Soviet system. It didn't seem catastrophic at the moment, at late 80s, but soon it turned out that it indeed was catastrophic, and the output decline had fell by more than 40% between 88 and 94. which had greatly contributed to the country's financial difficulties and economic difficulties. It was not just the issue of reform, it was not just the issue of breakup of the Soviet Union, but it was also the issue of catastrophic loss of volumes of output in the oil industry alone, which significantly influenced the economic situation in the country. Whether we are heading towards something similar or not, time will tell. But I have to say, given the structural situation, the odds are not good. I'll finish with that. We'll be happy to take more of your questions on even a broader set of topics. Thank you.
For covering such a huge amount of ground and so many topics. We have about 45 minutes or so for discussion and questions. I have a couple, and then and I'm glad Tim is here. Really appreciate how closely we've worked with him at the Center on Global Energy Policy, and also the New York Energy Forum, who I was remiss in not thanking when I welcomed everyone at the start, who's co-hosting this event with us. I just wanted to, these are slightly small points, but I just wanted to make sure, one follow-up question to something you said, that the price would rebound because at 40, 50, 60, the higher cost producers couldn't keep going. I'm wondering where you see that supply coming off the market from and how much of that will be Russia.
First, I don't think that, I think Russian pattern will follow just as it is. It will be mostly driven by inertia of these processes which I just described. And, you know, for the coming year, I don't see catastrophic scenarios. But what I see is the clear change of trend. So maybe, you know, we'll yet have to see, we need to see what kind of capital expenditure programs will be approved and so on. But I'd say that, you know, if you assume like 1–2% output decline in the oil industry this year, I think that's a reasonable forecast. So Russia will not deliver anything dramatic. What will, no, of course, the biggest story is the United States. And you see already that following, I think, the falling of the price below 70, there has been a very significant reduction in applications for new drilling. But, you know, the phenomenon of tight oil production is totally different from the, you know, old economics of big fields where you do exploration, you make investment decision, then you wait for the first oil to come, then volumes increase and so on. Tight oil is different. Price falls below reasonable levels, you stop drilling. Price rebounds, you just begin drilling again, and the volumes are back on the market. So I think this is how it's going to work. You'll see more decline in applications for drilling permits. You see less desire to.
So does that mean for prices to get back to 70 or 80 and stay there, the cuts have to come from somewhere other than U.S. shale?
Cuts in the U.S. shale, I think, will be important. However, it's also, you know, it's also important to watch how other producers than the tight oil will react, particularly deep offshore, which is already delivering a sizable amount of global output, and it's extremely sensitive to oil price. It's not necessarily that, I mean, I don't believe that they will shut down projects, because I remember, for instance, the situation in Russia in 98, 99, when oil have cost like $9, $10 per barrel. A lot of Russian projects and fields became loss-making in this situation. But they didn't shut them down. They just keep waiting for prices to rebound, and they generated cash, which was still useful, you know, to deal with creditors, to deal with contractors, and so on. So, you know, it's a more complicated question of how these higher cost producers like the deep offshore particularly would react. But I think inevitably, I mean, if the price will stay for some reasonable period of time at low levels, like, $40 and so on, some volumes will be off the market. You better ask Ed Morse about this because he knows better.
So just one follow-up on that. If they stay at those low levels and OPEC discovers some renewed ability to cooperate to pull some supply off, do you think Russia will go be part of those cuts? There were some widely reported discussions between Minister Naimi and the Russians. Do you think they will take part in that?
I don't think so. I think Russia will follow just under the inertia scenario as it is. We've had, I remember these discussions with OPEC about how we coordinate our efforts and how we cut production. They were happening in like 2001, 2002, when I was in government and so on. The problem is, no matter what anybody says in public, all these oil industry guys, the companies in Russia, when they feel that perspective that, there might be a political order that we cut production in order to keep the price, they will find their, behind the doors and corridor ways of access to top people in power to say, no, we need not to do that because we just lose money, lose volume, and that's it. Let Saudi Arabia do it. No, and particularly in this environment, 15 years ago the market was different. Now more new players are in, even OPEC has not a fraction of the former influence it had and so on. There's even less certainty that if you cut down the volume, you would win. Because, and what if these US tight oil producers can withstand the level of $40 per barrel? No one knows that for sure. And what if the government, US government, will help them somehow, so that they keep volumes and don't lose them? You can never, these are things which you cannot bet on. You can't, it's beyond your control. Russian oilers, I'm pretty sure they know it, and I'm pretty sure, like Saudis, they pretty much understand that they really cannot influence the market to that extent, so they just cut production and the price automatically goes back. They fear that they will simply lose the share, they would lose the revenue, and this is exactly what happened to Saudi Arabia in the first half of 1980s, where they altogether they have cut production 3 times, but they were not able to save price from falling, so they just lost the money. I don't think they want to repeat that mistake, and I don't think, maybe Putin has this idea, but oil companies, I think, will do their best to persuade him not to intentionally cut the production. I don't know what these talks with OPEC are about, frankly speaking, but this is my gut feeling that whenever it will come down to practical decisions, oil industry would lobby against that.
Let me ask just one more question and then pass the mic over to Tim. I just was wondering if you could say, you mentioned it, but talk a little bit more about the South Stream announcement and what motivated it and how we should understand it, and is it really done or might it come back?
A few things about South Stream. First, obviously it was not a cancellation of the project as much as moving the surface entry point just a few hundred kilometers away from Bulgaria to Turkey. So the pipeline through Black Sea with the same capacity, 63 billion cubic meters, is not cancelled as such. It has been just moved. So when, it's kind of ridiculous. I hear all this outcry by some people in Europe saying, we're going to freeze without Russian gas, see what the European Commission have done. We've irritated Gazprom and we're going to freeze to death in winter and so on. Whereas in fact, the pipe stays, it just has been moved a few hundred kilometers. So don't panic. Point number one. Point number two, after the meeting between Putin and Erdogan, where everything was decided, Turkish Energy Minister Yildiz had given a press conference, and I think this has been widely reported. I'm sure many of you saw that. He said, first, we don't have any specific agreement with Russia, just a memorandum to have talks, basically. So the talks are going on now. And understand that Turkey was never an easy negotiating partner. I understand that it's pressing hard for more discounts on current supplies, because Yildiz at the same conference have said, that's actually the second thing he said, is that we are unhappy with the current level of price, and we are even unhappy with the 6% discount that Putin have offered. Because we don't want a discount, we want a fair price, meaning that we want more discount. So I think there's a long road ahead with Turkey. And one more thing which I wanted to mention is that why the project was announced to be cancelled. Not only because of the propaganda issues, and not only to create the notion that, you know, pro-Putin people in Europe and elsewhere will start to weep that, you know, we're going to freeze without Russian gas. That was important, but that was not the thing. For those of you who have been following, you probably noticed that at end October, Gazprom had announced significant upward reconsideration of costs to 23.5 billion euros. And after that, in early November, in the parliamentary hearings, Claudio Descalzi, the new head of Italian company Eni, which is a major 20% shareholder in South Stream, he said, we will not agree to the cost overrun suggested by Gazprom, and we will withdraw if Gazprom insists on cost overrun, which I think there was no way back from that increased cost announcement. And exactly a week before a meeting between Putin and Erdogan, on the 24th of November, Descalzi went to Sochi and met with Miller. As far as I know, they had discussed this issue at length. And as far as I know, again, they had reached no positive result. Which means that it was technically much easier for Gazprom to cancel the whole shareholder structure of the old pipeline. Because, you know, given the fact that they had these new problems with Eni, Scaroni, the former chief, was a big friend of Russia and big friend of Putin. But since the management has changed and Descalzi took over, relations were much cooler than that. And now they have discovered that they have this big, huge disagreement with Eni on costs. So if they make a decision to move the pipeline from the entry point from Bulgaria to Turkey, they will spend ages agreeing that with Eni, and probably with no positive result. So it's much easier to cancel the one thing and just announce that it's going to be a totally different something. But it was not unpredictable because in May last year at Petersburg Forum, Putin have actually mentioned openly that if EU will continue to block South Stream, we will find a non-EU member country to enter the surface. So that was Turkey, and negotiations went on. It was very clear that the signals were there that they're negotiating this option. So finally, it ultimately resulted in the announcement with Erdogan. But I think with the current marketing situation and with catastrophic decline of volumes of supply to Europe, it's extremely questionable whether the pipeline is needed at all.
Great. First of all, thanks a lot for coming. We really appreciate it. You talked about the economic impacts of sanctions and their ability to limit financing and refinancing of debts, and the constraints that it has on new investment projects. Could you talk a little bit about the political impacts of sanctions? Some people have said the sanctions are a useful tool for President Putin to blame economic difficulties on the West and the US. Some people have said that's a price worth paying in the West who've advocated for sanctions. And some people have said, well, we would have got blamed anyway, so we should have put the sanctions in place, and we should continue to do so. Could you talk a little bit about the political impacts of the sanctions?
First, I have to say that sanctions have already had huge impact on Russian economy, extremely important impact. I continue to hear somebody saying that sanctions don't matter, they have not influenced anything. Sanctions are far more important factor at the moment than the oil price. Oil price is not a problem so far. We can handle this. We already had price declines. But, you know, this thing was completely off the radar screen in the previous years, and no Russian macroeconomists have ever talked about this thing. The key factor which was driving Russian economy forward in the previous years was Western credit. Western credit. The total amount of foreign debt of corporations and banks, the private sector, 10 years ago was $100 billion. At peak last year, July 1st, 2014, $660 billion. See this, almost, we were heading towards $1 trillion. They kept borrowing and borrowing, and nobody ever in Russia have seen this as a problem, because Western banks were always keen to provide us money. They were actually lining up to give credit to Gazprom, Rosneft, and so on. So nobody have, ever even theoretically imagined an opportunity that this Western financing will be completely shut down. There was such thing just didn't exist in assumptions and forecasts and whatever. But, I've talked to some top international bankers dealing with Russia a little less than a year ago when this whole Crimea thing started, when the little green men have already appeared, but the referendum was not yet held in Crimea. And they have said to me things like, for the first time ever, we have started to seriously reconsider political risks for institutions like VTB and Gazprom Bank, which was even before the first round of formal sanctions have been announced. Because serious people understood where all this thing is heading to. So sanctions played huge impact because a lot of this debt, corporate debt, is short-term, relatively short-term. It has to be permanently refinanced. And there was no problem with that. Everybody was happy to refinance us before political sanctions. Now it's a completely closed-down opportunity. And what is important to understand, the sanctions introduced by European Union, most harmful for Putin because he didn't expect that. His game was to count that Europe will continue to be divided and controlled. The sanctions by European Union were introduced for 1 year. They are set to expire in July. And some people, including the very, very top people, including the most top people in the Russian governance system, they are very much counting on the fact that sanctions are lifted this July. So we have to hold on for just a few more months, and basically that's it. What is important to understand, that after what happened, I believe that the banking community, even if the sanctions will be lifted, which is questionable, will be extremely cautious about providing money to Russians, because you never know whom Putin invades next and what happens afterwards, right? So this is a few words about the importance and the perspective. So it's a long-term perspective. And in summer, and even the early autumn, there were high hopes among top decision makers in Russia that Western financing will be, and they even literally said, and some of them continue to say that, they said, oh, to hell with the West, we're going to borrow money from China. Bitter disappointment. 2 hugely unsuccessful summits, a summit between prime ministers in Moscow in October and the summit between presidents in November. Again, there were specific hopes that Chinese banks would release massive amount of credit for Russian borrowers. Stupid, because Chinese financial system is not designed to provide money to outsiders in big numbers. It is designed to support domestic economy, and it is designed to support Chinese exports. 2 small loans, which we got, $2 billion for VTB and $2 billion for Vneshekonombank, which we got in October, they were tied loans, export-related, which means that you cannot get the money until you bring the contract about purchase, procurement of some Chinese goods and services, which means that there's only money given to be immediately sent back to China. On this, in small amounts, on these conditions, they're ready to deal with us. So this financing crisis is the key problem at the moment. It's not going anywhere. We haven't, there is, except monetary emission, which I mentioned, there's no other visible instrument of how to replace that. And it's not going away with formal lifting of the sanctions, because the self-censorship of banks would remain. Now, the political impact, that pretty much depends on Vladimir Putin's understanding of what's going on with the Russian economy, or lack thereof. so far. He has given this couple of big speeches in December. He's addressed the Federal Assembly in his large press conference on the 18th, which had revealed two major things. First, he is pretty relaxed with the figure of currently available financial reserves. He said, oh, we have more than 400 billion reserves, we have nothing to worry about. In reality, I'll be happy to talk about it more, there is far less than that. And this is not the figure. Don't be lulled by this figure. This figure is out of touch. 420 billion, not anymore. We don't have it. It's much smaller than that. 150 billion is actually the currency which is available for central bank for interventions on the current currency market. 150, that's it. Not 400, no nothing. And second, Putin completely, he's a guy who never lived an ordinary life for past 20 plus years. He doesn't go in the grocery store and stuff. When he talks about the effects of devaluation of ruble, I see that he completely misunderstands. He's just repeating the mantras which is brought to him in the memos by people from the Ministry of Finance. They say, oh, devaluation of ruble is good because there's going to be less spending from the budget. This is exactly what Putin repeats in public. But the thing is that what the key important problem associated with the devaluation is that it directly hits population's purchasing power. The Russian consumer market is overwhelmingly dependent on imports. Food, medicines, clothing, what have you, everything. And, you know, you had this salary of 40,000 rubles a month, which basically allowed you to live somehow. 40,000 is not much. You cannot really live a luxury life on that. But you can go on. Now, to go on like that, you need 80,000 now, or even more. And nobody's, in the depressed economic situation that we have right now, nobody's ready to increase the salaries, obviously. So I think it looks like Putin misunderstands this effect. When he will feel it, there will be political implications. He will probably start to rethink what he is doing. When he will also understand, right now, his next, you know, they're always, you know, hunting these magic silver bullets, which are always moving, so they were still not able to catch them. It was Chinese financing. Hopes were dashed. Now the big hope is lifting of sanctions in July. But okay, you know, it's a big political question, but okay, even if they lift it, again, the problem will remain. Banks will be much more cautious in dealing with Russians, particularly directly state-related companies. They still don't understand that. When all these things become revealed, tragic effect of devaluation of ruble on population's purchasing power, then problem with sanctions environment essentially lingering on beyond July in one form or another. Oh, that might have political implications. It's another big topic of political scenarios.
Can I push you a little bit on the political implications, both on the domestic front and on the international front? You know, some people say that with President Putin's popularity no longer linked to economic growth, but being primarily based on growing nationalism, that the economic crisis might lead him to be more aggressive abroad. Some people say the opposite, that no, that this is now a good time for President Putin to cut a deal, declare victory, and focus on problems closer to home. Do you have a sense of what the kind of geopolitical implications of the decline in the Russian economy might be?
First, I think Putin, again, being calmed down by these reports that we still have plenty of reserves, I think he feels dangerously relaxed about the economy. He feels that there is a problem, but he's still pretty much focused on geopolitics as the key issue of the day. You know, to turn that Titanic around will take time. He will really have to see some major economic difficulties in the country, far worse than we see today, to shift his mind. that just not yet happened. He's still playing this, geopolitical games and the toy soldiers. I don't know what he has there. But, the economic, he got the message that something is wrong, but it's not to the serious extent that he needs to completely refocus his attention from one to another. But with his popularity, it is an important thing. Don't be fooled by the 85% figure. The 85% figure is an answer to a question which is, given all the propaganda notions, is more or less can be formulated that way. Do you approve the fact that Russia have occupied and integrated Crimea in an absolutely bloodless manner, no one hurt, we won't experience any harm, we won't have to pay for it, everybody's happy and Crimea is ours at no cost? Yes or no? 85% yes. I can tell you that the popularity of Putin, just one simple illustration which I think will give you the hint. If you take a look at the same polls by the same pollsters, they have shown steady decline of his popularity, basically starting from the peak in 2008 with the beginning of 2008 crisis, down to stable low 40s in the past couple of years before this annexation of Crimea, right? So he was hanging in low 40s for 2 years, which basically reflects the fundamental thing that people grew tired of him. They want to see something new. They want to see the way forward. The way forward. We cannot. It's extremely psychologically problematic to have a guy in power in the country who always talks about the present and the past, never the future. Most recently, he switched to 1,000 years past. Sacred, holy, something, which was really interesting to hear, right? People see that this is irrelevant. Of course, this major narcotic was injected with Crimea. So it basically jumped out from 40 to 85, right? But this fundamental thing which kept this at 40 didn't go away. It have never went away. It's just a narcotic. And I can tell you that it is already shifting. If you talk to ordinary population, Crimea is a non-issue now. Believe me. Donbass was never an issue. Crimea, everybody was happy, but Russian people don't understand what Donbass is, and there is not a success story in Donbass. So they just look at it and say, what is that? What do we need this for? So I think what we have now, there is a very clear shift in public opinion towards economic issues right now. It's going to be more so after everybody wakes up from the New Year holidays. You got to understand about Russia one simple thing. Key word about our society and political system is inertia. So when somebody was going to come here and talk about some fast change, catastrophe, collapse, overthrow of the regime, don't listen. It just won't happen that way. This is a very, very big machine with a big inertia, which takes quite some time to turn around. But the turnaround has begun, and I can tell you that even the polls reflect that in different ways, that the shift towards economic problems as a major issue has begun, and clearly Russian population runs faster here than Putin himself. People understood better that economics is something wrong about it at the moment. Putin did not yet. Sorry for a long answer.
Yeah, so we want to make sure we have time for questions. If we keep the questions short and the answers short, we'll get in as many as we can. I suspect there are a lot, so we may take 2 or 3 at a time. But if people have questions, raise your hand, and then Ka will bring a microphone around.
I wanted to find out how do you envision the sanctions being lifted, and what mechanisms will be used with respect to possibly having Mr. Putin, quote unquote, save face in terms of having the sanctions lifted? What timetable do you see as far as that is concerned?
Just say 2 more. Just pass it up to Kim right here.
Hi, Kimberly Martin from Barnard College here at Columbia. Can you explain to us a little bit what the domestic alternatives are to buying from Gazprom?
Sorry, it's domestic alternatives to...
The domestic alternatives for consumers who do not wish to purchase from Gazprom.
And there was one other question up here, and right over here, and then we'll go to the side next.
Frank Bamberger, FB Asset Management. At the price of $50, $55 a barrel, is that below the cost of production in Russia?
First, thank you. I think we'll start with that. The cost of production story is, again, I would refer that you just take a look. It's very simple to find in like Rosneft report or Lukoil report. For 9 months of 2014, the last figures, $3 on the wellhead supplied into pipeline, $3 per barrel. Like $4.5 in money of the day, devaluation helped here a lot, is a transportation cost to ports. So 10 plus altogether. So again, as I told you, they have this large pillow of extra things which they finance, which are not directly related to physically pumping and shipping oil. And so these are capital expenditures, and these are acquisitions of assets, and these are administrative costs, many other stuff that is in there. But as far as if somebody will tell you that Russia has actually high production and delivery costs, no. Still, because of the the bulk of production is made from the brownfield areas, and that's fairly low compared to this, $50, $40 figures. Now, the issue of sanctions. The way it was, the key thing here is European Union, because I think Russian authorities can count on the base case scenario that the United States might not lift sanctions quite sometime soon. But the European Union, they believe that they can handle, because what happens is these sanctions were introduced for 1 year term in July by consensus. So right now, to lift the sanctions before July would take consensus of all EU member states, which is non-realistic. So they will probably stay until July. But then to prolong them in July, again, takes a consensus, so everybody agrees that sanctions need to be prolonged. And I think this is hardly achievable at the moment, because there are some clear friends of Putin within the European Union, including like guys like Orban, president of Hungary, prime minister of Hungary, sorry, who will most definitely, some others will, I'm sure, also speak against continuing the sanctions. So actually what they hope for is that Europe lifts the sanctions. Some of the money, which is a questionable thing, I mean, it is debated now, it's not clear. Some of the European banks will then be willing, as Putin and his people hope, to give some new credit, to provide some new credit to Russian borrowers. Whether that's true or not is absolutely not clear, because if the US sanctions remain in place, but the European are lifted, it is very highly probable that the European banks will be cautious because of American policy regulations and so on, and so they will not rush releasing us the credit. Let's see. However, Putin's approach here is a step-by-step approach, and particularly with, let's be serious, with lack of understanding of certain important economic issues. And with, this permanent emotional need for a magic silver bullet, I'd say one thing which they count on at the moment is lifting European sanctions in July. I don't think they appreciate all the whole spectrum of complexities which is associated with that. They just think that this is, we're going to reach this point and then the situation will get better. This is probably how they think. And Gazprom, few things. Some of the consumers reduce the overall amount of output because it's not economic to work on expensive gas, and unfortunately this happens. Some consumers buy more from independent gas producers, which have dramatically increased their share on the domestic market. I think it's Well over 20% now the share of gas pumped through Gazprom system, which is belonging to independent gas producers. Some switch to coal, some switch to fuel oil. It's like all together, but for 9 months they have lost like around over 20 BCM on domestic market, and if they that figure, the last available figure for 9 months, it didn't count the last 3 months of the year, where it is reasonable to expect that another 10 BCM might be lost on domestic market, which means that 2013 the amount of supply was 228 to domestic market. Minus 30 means 200. 100 BCM loss of market compared to like a period 6-7 years ago.
So let's go to this side now. There was a question up here.
My name is Robert Sillin. I work for Belmont Capital. I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about how the pipelines with China will be financed, number one, and number two, how the drilling will be financed, because the agreements with China are very important for Russia in terms of balancing off demand, and they could have significant impact for American exports of LNG and other energy products from non-U.S. sources.
Another question up here, the 2 more questions right here.
My name is Rostislav Taborski. I'm from Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What is your opinion about can this low price environment help Russian oil and gas industry to become more efficient? What do you think about this?
Hi, I'm Alex Osipovich from Energy Risk Magazine. You mentioned Bashneft at the end of your talk. I'm curious to know your thoughts about why Mr. Yevtushenkov was put under house arrest and what you think about the fact that such methods are being used.
Mm-hmm. Please. First, about China, it is important that, to understand that this 38 billion cubic meter figure, which has been circulating around since the agreement was signed in May, this is not exactly reflecting the reality. Because in late September, one of the middle-level officials at Gazprom had given a public interview when he actually revealed the schedule of supplies, which means that in 10 years from now, it's still going to be 25 BCM. We're going to reach the level of 38 BCM by 2030. So it's going to be very, very slow and very gradual. So it's not that big volume as everybody talks about. It's 20, 25 BCM 10 years from now. I don't think they will have catastrophic impact on markets. No. So it's relatively small-scale agreement, despite all the noise about it. Second, we see that over the year there's been so much babble about that this was just the first step, and we're going to expand and we're going to develop more joint projects with China. Specifically, they have been offered 49% in Vladivostok LNG facility, which CNPC had declined, and Gazprom had officially started to talk about canceling Vladivostok LNG project. And there's been talk that in November, during the Summit of Presidents, we will sign another contract on the Western corridor to supply gas from Western Siberia to Western China through Altai. Nothing of that sort. Just another memorandum of intent, which we have seen plenty over the years. So Chinese seems to stick for just one relatively not overwhelming contract in terms of volumes, which was signed in May. And as far as the financing is concerned, Gazprom is in a tight spot. Because as far as I understand, from what I know, talking to their people and so on, they have not been counting on the situation that they have to borrow the money, get the money elsewhere, except Chinese. They sincerely believe that Chinese will provide the necessary upfront financing in one form or another. And this is why actually they were pretty happy when they announced in May, together with the signed agreement, they have announced the $25 billion advance. It becomes clear now that together with the advance, Chinese have demanded further discount on price. Quite significant. Not $10, not $20, but 50 at least, I think. to which Gazprom was not willing to agree. This is why advance issue was dropped. Now, the issue of where the sources of financing for the power of Siberia will come from is basically hanging in the air. Again, my prediction, they will come for government aid, just in 2 or 3, maybe 4 months. That's it. There is nothing else. And Chinese have turned to be reluctant to provide them the money, both for the pipeline and for upstream development, which is not that expensive as compared to the pipeline itself, and which is linked. Speaking about the efficiency of the oil and gas companies, you got to understand how the system works. These kickbacks, which I have been mentioning, it's not just freak occurrence. It's specifically designed system to enrich people through that. Very important people. Just let me tell you one thing. If you take a look at the rating of biggest Russian companies by size of revenue, we have such a rating. It's published by Expert magazine. It's called Expert 400. 400 biggest Russian companies by size of annual revenue. You will see that in top 30, occupying somewhere around 20th and the 30th positions, are 2 biggest contractors of Gazprom who are developing the upstream and building the pipelines. Stroygazmontaj, controlled by Arkady Rottenberg, former judo trainer of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and Stroygaz Consulting, which is now controlled by Chechen entrepreneur 75% Ruslan Baysarov, basically by Kadyrov, you know. So these are, it's not the top 20, top 30 Russian oil and gas companies or oil and gas construction companies. Top 20, 30 biggest Russian businesses. You see what a profit center they developed, which basically sucks out all the cash flows from the state monopolies. It's a system. You think these people will dismantle that? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It's a system. They specifically, did they establish control over Gazprom just because they think it was strategically important for national interests of the Russian Federation? Pardon me. Oh, of course not. Stroygazmontaj and Stroygaz Consulting. This is something which they did it for, to be able to divert the cash flows towards alternative profit centers which are specifically controlled by these people. You think they will dismantle this system in reaction to the world oil price? It's like, it's an old Russian joke which is being told more and more frequently because of the economic situation we have. Is like a father comes home and says like, sorry children, my salary was reduced. And the children ask, dear father, does it mean that you will drink less? Father says, no, it means that you will eat less. So it's the unchallenged monopoly environment with enormous capability of bid for state aid, basically keep the system afloat through taxpayers' money. Because they can. So why would they, consider efficiency, firing all these Rottenberg guys? No, I don't think they will opt for it. Now, speaking about Yevtushenkov, it's quite clear that the whole thing is driven by Igor Sechen's expansionist behavior. It was a clear declaration of intent given when he came as CEO of Rosneft that he wants to continue swallow companies. He swallowed TNK-BP. Afterwards, there was a very clear black mark leaked into the media that Rosneft has interest in purchasing large stakes in Bashneft and Lukoil. Specifically, 2 companies were mentioned. It was this leak was printed by Russian media in June 2013. And obviously, Bashneft is more exposed. It's far more vulnerable than Lukoil, so it looks like it's the next acquisition target. However, it was not an easy target because Vladimir Yevtushenkov has and had quite solid personal relations with Putin. Putin has some warm attitude towards him. He met him quite often. He supported some of his projects, like the so-called medical Skolkovo, which is Yevtushenkov's idea of analogy of medical technology center, similar to innovation center, which Skolkovo is, so it was a far more difficult target. So you have a whole set of conspiracy theories about why the arrest have happened. My reading is that when the acquisition attempt became much clearer, Yevtushenkov had announced in June last year, he had announced the idea to have an SPO at London Stock Exchange to protect him from hostile acquisition. I think that was a huge political mistake on his part, because I think Sechin used all his might to, bombard Putin with the classified memos from secret services saying, oh, you see, Yevtushenkov wants to sell his assets abroad to foreigners. You see, we have this challenging geopolitical environment, and he goes to London, try to sell our oil there, I think in this regard, Putin have lost the desire to defend him. He said, oh, he wanted to escape with SPO in London in this hostile environment. I mean, let Sechin do his job. I won't do a thing to save Yevtushenkov. This is, I think, why he was put under house arrest, but not arrested physically, not put in jail, and actually the situation was quite soft, because Putin still, he regarded Yevtushenkov to some extent. And the fact that he was released immediately the other day after the Black Tuesday of December 16th. No, that's very simple. I directly associated with the desire to calm the business, calm the market, and which was seen by the loyal Russian big businesses of, oh, very good sign. Oh, they at least have, given something away, so we might be better off now. So I think this doesn't remove the factor that Bashneft is gone, and Yevtushenkov was forced to let it go. So no, I don't want to make any grim predictions, but if I was Oleg Perov, I would be a little bit nervous at the moment, if you understand what I'm saying.
Vladimir, thanks so much. That was a really broad-ranging and fascinating conversation. We covered the future of Russian oil and gas production and the impact of the falling oil price, the impact of sanctions on the Russian economy and politics, how we should think about Russia's engagement on energy issues geopolitically with Europe and China and elsewhere, and many other topics. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. For those of you, we're going to keep working on these issues. I know with the Center on Global Energy Policy at the Harriman Institute too. I think on the table outside you'll find copies of the study we released in September. For those of you who haven't seen it, on the impact of U.S. natural gas exports on Russian foreign policy and on European energy security. On January 21st, the Center on Global Energy Policy will be releasing a major study on U.S. oil export policy as well, as part of an ongoing series of work we have on that topic. So I want to thank Tim for joining us and helping me moderate today. I want to thank our partners at the New York Energy Forum for co-hosting this event, and most especially want to thank you, Vladimir, for joining us. Please join me in thanking Vladimir Milov.
Thank you.